The recent YIPPEEE changes have been a hot topic of debate since the release of 7.05. Seeing as I've made the job the entire niche of this channel, I feel it appropriate to weigh in on the conversation. I wanted to wait to talk about the changes until after I've had a good amount of time to play with it across all areas of the game, and collect my thoughts to really formulate an opinion with something tangible to back it up. After taking the job through both the casual and high-end rating areas of the game, I think the changes are good. Before you grab your pitchforks, let me explain. I'm not going to spend time here listing out each change that came with 7.05, because I already have a short 2-minute video that goes over this if you want to watch that first and come back. I'm going to talk about the biggest change, the removal of Noxious Gnash. This has widely been considered a bad move by the community, and most of the criticisms revolving around this are valid, and I agree with them to a point. Renan talked in his video about how its removal gutted a big area of complexity with the job, with its managing the debuff throughout your rotation. I agree with him as someone who enjoys this kind of buff management. Hell, my first job was Bard, and it's still one of my favorite jobs with its dots, songs, and gauge management. And his point of failure state is a very good point, one that I fully agree with, and is healthy for the game. Another big criticism is around the class fantasy of the job. It revolves around this deadly, venomous serpent, but the venom just got completely gutted, so now it's just a snake that bites you really hard. But perhaps the biggest criticism of these changes is the timing of them. Many people have made a very good point saying that we never got a real chance to try out Noxious Gnash in the highest tier of rating, and they barely gave us any time to fully figure out the job in optimized and difficult scenarios. I'll be honest, at first I hated the change when they announced it. The thing I miss about Noxious Gnash is the constant rotational decisions you had to make depending on its remaining duration, and manipulating your other resources to put yourself in a better position to more optimally refresh this debuff where you don't ever drop or overcap it. Refreshing this debuff with Dreadwinder was always a gain, and deciding to hold or spend Rattling Coils had an effect that put your rotation in a better position to go into your burst windows without overcapping the debuff at certain skill speeds. But it's exactly for these reasons why I believe the debuff was removed. YIPPEEE is a job designed around rotational freedom and resource management. I mean, yeah, 14 is a spreadsheet MMO with scripted fights, so once you figure out the script, you can optimize down to the GCD and stick to it 95% of the time. But even after doing each extreme and all 4 savage fights, the rotation was never the same, just as each fight isn't the same. YIPPEEE doesn't have a looping rotation per se, but rather landmarks around your 2-minute burst windows. Everything in between is managing your cooldowns and resources so you don't drop your buffs or overcap. If you're playing optimally, these off-minute windows will look different depending on the fight. With Noxious Gnash, planning out a fight had to revolve around this one debuff, as every main resource we have is affected by it, either directly or indirectly. It also couldn't drop, and it couldn't overcap duration. What this means is certain resources and ability timings become locked on each fight. Dreadwinder was the main issue here. Refreshing Nox with Dreadwinder was a better use of it than refreshing with Dreadfangs, since it did more raw damage. Not doing this meant having to use more Dreadfangs than technically needed, and in most cases this winds up being a damage loss. And we mainly just spent our charges to refresh this debuff. The problem is Dreadwinder has other uses too. The longer recast timers of both it and the 2 coils helped with disconnects and manipulating rotational timing. It also has areas of optimization regarding our haste and damage buff refreshes. These aspects were never fully utilized with it also refreshing Nox. If you wanted to utilize these aspects, then you had to plan your refreshes around that point, so that you don't overcap or drop the debuff, which will affect your entire rotation depending on where you decide to use it in the fight. This was the primary reason why we never wanted to use it within 15 seconds of Serpent's Ire's cooldown. The point I'm getting at is, our rotation revolved around Noxious Gnash, not the fight itself. I have a feeling this is what spurred on this change, and why it initially felt so jarring and empty, I guess is the right word, when it was removed and we couldn't really figure out why at first. YIPPEEE's toolkit is designed to be fight specific. Crafting rotations around the rotation itself, instead of the mechanics of a fight, to me is opposite of what the devs intended it to be. Initially, I thought that since Nox was removed, the new Vicewinder was just a dead button you pressed. But through progression, I found myself utilizing it more and more for specific uses, all of which related to a specific mechanic. It goes back to what I said several months ago in my pre-Dawntrail guides. Our greatest resource is time. I can think of no better example of this than in the first phase of M4S. I'll go over this more thoroughly when it's this fight's turn for Viper Sight, but with the crazy amount of disconnects in this phase, I found myself using Vicewinder a lot to help with these disconnects and to help keep buff uptime. And leading up to the 4-minute burst here, timing Vicewinder combo perfectly allows us to use 3 Uncoiled Furies while the boss destroys the arena. Then immediately go into the 4-minute burst window with double Reawaken without dropping buffs. The 60-second buff duration and removal of Nox allows us to use these other special resources freely without having to weave in a dual wield combo when we otherwise don't want to. Setting this up in our rotation took a little over 2 minutes of preparation and very precise use of resources and their different timings. And it was incredibly rewarding and felt amazing to pull off. This change even affects Uncoiled Fury usage. Sometimes we wanted to either hold or spend Uncoiled Fury to help our Nox refreshes align better. After the amount of time I've relied on Uncoiled Fury this tier, trying to optimize this ability around debuff refreshes, I think would have been more frustrating than rewarding in my opinion. I thought I would be bored with the removal of Nox, but no, actually the opposite. I'm having so much fun being able to craft up rotations that work for the fight I'm on, not crafting rotations to make sure I don't drop a 20-second debuff. This also means that there can be multiple rotational solutions to deal with a mechanic that are equally valid. Now, some choices may be better than others in a given situation, but that's what's fun about optimizing this job. There are multiple ways to solve a problem. And one thing that I haven't yet seen mentioned about the changes is how it'll affect ultimates. One of the reasons why Reaper is so good in top was because of their gauges and resources. Noxious Gnash and Death's Design did the same thing on paper, but the difference is that Death's Design is integral to Reaper's rotation to make their double and shroud burst windows happen. Viper has a similar toolkit to Reaper with its gauges and different resources, but Nox didn't make our rotation work. We just had to apply it first or we lost the 10% damage it gave. This had huge issues with reopeners. Our burst windows are extremely tight as it is, so trying to find a way to be able to do a double reawaken reopener into raid buffs, while also making sure Nox was applied, was pretty much out of the question. Viper's burst windows are also comparatively weaker than other melees. Our strength lies in our constant output. In Ultimate, some phases are just long enough to get a full burst window in. These windows are vital when it comes to progressing Ultimates on its current patch. The hypothetical rotations I came up with Nox were all either not ideal or suboptimal, with the best simming options being these cursed amalgamations that looked weird on paper and would have probably felt clunky in practice. With Nox gone, we can freely pull and prepare all of our massive potency abilities into one window without as much timing issues. And I suspect pulling these windows off correctly will feel incredible. Before 7.05, Viper was one of the weakest jobs to bring into Ultimates. I'm interested in seeing if these changes will help make them a little bit better, especially in DSR and top. But let's not ignore the more casual areas of the game either. With the removal of Nox, I've personally been finding my expert roulettes and dungeon runs to be a lot less tedious and more enjoyable. In the past, I'd have to spend a lot of time making sure all of my buffs and debuffs were applied on every target before pressing Reawaken, and it took even longer if I wanted to do a double Reawaken on a pack. And by then, the mobs are already dead. If the mobs are getting blasted, I'd much rather be the one doing the blasting. My main issue with the job though is in these casual areas of the game, but this is from the perspective of a high-end Ultimate Raider. Because the job is so fight-specific, if the fight is easy and boring, then the job becomes easy and boring because it really just plays itself. And at lower levels, Viper is just a glowing whack-a-mole simulator with very minimal areas to optimize in. With that said though, ease and boredom are incredibly subjective. What one player may find easy or boring, another may find extremely difficult and exciting. Which is why I think this job is so amazing. Yes, the changes lowered the skill floor, but the skill ceiling remains pretty high. Maybe slightly lower than before, but there's still plenty of potential high-end optimization that it can do, all of which is dependent on the fight, not its rotation. Which is why I think my Viper Sight series will be beneficial to players looking to learn how to optimize and get better at Viper. Diving into fight-specific optimization and having discussions with you guys about what you did and what worked or may work better is one of my favorite parts about this job. This job is designed so that anyone can play it and feel like a complete slicing and dicing badass. So if you made the decision to drop Viper because of these changes, I'd urge you to come back and give it a try. And don't just hit a striking dummy. That's where this job, in my opinion, gets really boring. It's good for learning how the job flows, but the real enjoyment of the job can be found in the environment it was designed for, actual fights. The job in this context is incredibly fun. I would even argue more fun with the removal of Nox, which is something I'd honestly thought I'd never say. If you want to take it into Savage, I genuinely think it's the best melee in the game for it right now, balancing aside. We're the best melee job at dealing with disconnects and disengages, which this tier has quite a few of. The lack of a personal defensive cooldown didn't really make itself an apparent issue for me this tier, but the upcoming ultimate might change my mind. So I hope my reasoning behind my stance on the matter keeps you from nailing me to a cross. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments. My mind is still open. I, for one, am still in love with the job and excited to see where it goes in future patches. Thanks for watching.